Thank you very much, George. In case you can't picture an axe head in true pioneer style, I'm offering you an image of an axe head. What I set out to do in my paper is to ask questions. Questions around the perceived wisdom, which sees numerical growth focused mission as the default and desirable outworking of our calling to become a more Christ-centered, Jesus-shaped church. Questions as to whether the drive for numerical growth is feeding busyness as proxy for useful effort, which Carl Newport in his book Deep Work argues leads to our being overwhelmed and on the verge of burnout. I ask, isn't this antithetical to flourishing? I do not have the experiences of those who have survived the strategic development funding. So I do the next best thing. What I do is I examine the outcomes of a study commissioned as part of the Living Ministry Research Project of the Church of England. It's called the Mixed Ecologists, Experiences of Mixed Ecology Ministry in the CLB 2021. I use it to find out how challenging planting is to flourishing. And then I also explore how a growth target mindset accentuates the detrimental impact of planting on flourishing. I conclude with an exegesis of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 4 to query whether the quest for growth is akin to the folly that informed Nebuchadnezzar's hubris. I kick off my talk with a particular statistic from the 2022 report of the titled Independent Review of Lowest Income Community Funding and Strategic Development, which stated in 2020, which estimated that up until 2020, 11,500 new disciples have been witnessed so far through projects supported by the SDF. I want to unpack that further. I think the statistic in itself says it all. The idea that numerical growth in disciples is a core and measurable focus of missional investment within the sites of the CLV. I will consider the SDF on its own and not the successor fund titled the SMIB. Since its inception, SDF has awarded close to £180 million towards core diocesan funding to deliver projects supporting growth and social action. Significantly and in line with its stated purpose, it has funded projects in 39 of the largest urban areas, including 17 out of the 20 where church attendance was less than 1% of the population in 2019. Recipient dioceses have been grateful. They reflected positively about its benefits, speaking about the impact on diocesan culture, improving accountability and measurement. However, a minority argue that the focus on particular measurable outcomes was unwelcome. And it's these measurable outcomes I want to reflect on a little this afternoon. What is the lived experience of church planters in the field, and in particular those who have had a target growth focus? What does flourishing look like for them? There are three common areas that emerged from the research I spoke with earlier about that impede flourishing. The first one was the attitude and circumstances of inherited congregations, who all spoke at length about how the existing congregation, which served as the base from which fresh expressions grew, shaped their capacity to participate, the amount of time and energy the participant also had to invest in pioneering activity. Some congregations had no grasp of mission. A participant spoke about how few of them really understood the concept of mission or even discipleship, or willing to, within their own life, demonstrate patterns of personal prayer or worship. Another tension was whether pioneering activity was viewed as a mechanism to restock Sunday and sustain the congregation. There was a question as how servicing the fresh expression would have little direct impact on the existing congregation. In fact, one described how in their benefits, most of the people wanted the chaplains to minister to them, to look after them, and then whatever time was left could be used to look after the fresh expression. Another challenge was the attitude of the diocese broadly. In some cases, they described an intentional strategy to support the work. Posts were created, funding provided, and there was good support in place. However, for a significant number, it was something of an experiment within the diocese. This could be frustrating. Some mentioned tensions, others spoke about challenges with funding, lack of clarity as to models of ministry, and in particular, incapacitating bureaucracy, in particular, reporting structures. Within SDF, it's not unknown to be reporting simultaneously to several funding boards all at the same time. For others, their positions were impacted by short-term funding, which it fed into a sense of anxiety. The third point I want to look at is the specifics of the local context and ability of clergy and inherited congregations to support the mixed mode of I'll come back to that. The mixed mode expression that was taking place, supporting the planting work that was taking place. There was the need to listen well, to walk the streets, to talk to people, sit in pubs. One commented, pioneering was about relationship, relationship, relationship. Mission is about relationship, relationship, relationship. So I spent a lot of time out there. I spent a lot of time going where the people have coffee. All of this fed to a lot of pressure on the in that study. I want to now layer that pressure with that attendant to initiatives that were supported by STF and the demands to report on growth, and argue that the whole thing would function to impede the well-being and flourishing of the pioneers. Now, I want to, having addressed that, I'm wanting to question what exactly informs the drive for growth. And with this, I'm looking at the Daniel chapter 4, and I'll read a few verses. It says, Daniel, having been perplexed for a time, and his thoughts clarified him, said to the king, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Belteshazzar answered, my lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves, abundant fruit, providing food for all, shelter with wild animals, having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. And then verse 28, all this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking in the royal palace, He said, is not this the great Babylon that I built as a royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? I'm wondering if we offer a hermeneutic of institutional hubris to that chapter. Is that what drives our mission for growth? Is that what drives the hunger for growth? Is there an inherent and inbuilt characteristic in power holders to seek to find and express their identity in the exhibition of numerical strength? Is sustainability a product of numerical growth or an outcome of faithful dependence on the Holy Spirit? Is self-sufficiency a sublime tendency attributable to leading a large-sized church plant not at odds with the core tenets of our faith tradition that calls us to faithfully be vulnerable and draw strength from the sustenance of Christ? Does the idolization of growth take our focus off Christ, the author and finisher of our faith? Is small size itself not a primary pull towards finding direction from God? And in turn, that dependency forcing us to turn our resources to deepening discipleship with a focus on turning us into missionary disciples. The question then is, shouldn't we be aiming for a deepening of our relationship with God, with self, the other? Shouldn't that be our useful effort? Wouldn't that lead to a deeper spiritual flourishing? As I close, I'm going to ask the question, is deep ever wide? Can growth and flourishing ever form both sides of the same ask? In transformation mission, paradigm shift in the theology of mission, David Bosch notes the mutual transformation that God's mission initiates. Mission transforms both the receiving community and the one sent in mission, even as it transforms the understanding of what God's mission is. What happens if we are confident enough to free our congregation and equip them to do mission? What if we stop seeing mission, in the words of Farrell and Caleb in their book, Real Congregational Mission, as Instagrammable moments, more effective at satisfying church members and power holders than at making a lasting difference, producing what's too often consumer-oriented, selfie mission? What if we bring, in fact, that mission, they argue, accentuates a detrimental impact on planting and flourishing? My 3 questions didn't make it up, sorry. I want to offer us these questions as I bring my talk to a close, and it's this. What does vulnerability look like in the places where God has called us to be faithful in missional contexts? How is discipling happening in a way that enables our whole congregation to be missional? Are growth and flourishing these 2 sides of the same coin or 2 ends of the same axe? Thank you.